Hi, Misha here, and just about 2 weeks ago, I did kind of a preview first impressions video on this parts set here. This is a Taiwanese T65. This is the original military rifle from the 70s and 80s, firing 223, 5.56, and it was originally intended for the 55 grain round, like M193. Anyway, I did kind of a preview video. Unfortunately, in that video, as it turned out, a couple of my camera settings were a little off. They had been changed by someone who was using it, and kind of inadvertent sabotage, as one person put it. So yeah, it was not the best. So for those of you who bore with me and tolerated it, I greatly appreciate it. For those of you who felt the need to comment, as I said then, if you'd like to come help, sincerely and truly, I'd be much obliged, because I'm kind of making do with what I can. Anywho, got the camera kind of set again, and I thought, let's talk more about the kit, now that I've had a little time with it, and talk about progress on getting this built into a rifle. Now, because of YouTube policy, this will not be a how-to, a build video, but we will talk about things and compare it with other things and just kind of hang out talking about a very unique military variant here. So yeah, the name is T65 for the Taiwanese calendar, which was the year 1976 in the Western calendar. And this was to be Taiwan, or the island nation of the Republic of China's first 223 rifle, and kind of their first attempt at something domestic. Now, they had been building under license the M14 as the Type 57. That was a more or less direct copy from America. This would definitely borrow extremely heavily from the Colt M16A1, kind of the perfected version seen in the latter stages of the Vietnam War and throughout the 70s and 80s. But it would have its own things, namely an AR-18 gas piston system, as you see here. It also had some unique features like flip-up low-light sights, sling swivels that could rotate to the left, such as on the stock here, for carrying in a few different positions. A very unique kind of paddle stock. Trapdoor butt plate. Pretty standard. Upper and bolt group, but as you see, it doesn't have a carry handle. Now, the later T65 K2, first introduced around 1987, at least in the military service, would have more of a carry handle. This is not exactly well, I guess technically it is kind of a flat top, but it's more of an AR-18 style. And again, it has a flip-up sight, slab side, very small brass deflector, port door, and of course the nut and everything is basically the same, although it's a different cut. We have the same basic rifle length buffer and everything. So this will go on to a standard lower, and luckily for us, it can use a standard pencil profile M16A1 barrel, .625, if it hasn't been previously drilled and kind of cut for the gas block. Here's our gas system and its block. And here we have an M16A1 20-inch pencil profile barrel, threaded. This was donated by a subscriber and supporter. Tried to pay him. He said he didn't have any use for it, so he sent it over, and much obliged, because you cannot find a lot of parts right now. So it's in the white. Only doesn't have a hole drilled for the gas port or the block, which is good, meaning we can just slide this on. It'll require a little bit of fitting, of course, because it's potentially oversized, but it should line up with the shoulder just about right. And again, we can drill our gas port where we need it. As far as this nut screwed right down on, and the bolt in here. Locks in just fine. So just kind of hand fitting it. It's working out well. Now from these kits, because of the demilling process, and my best folks, there's a screw that'll be missing here, and also a roll pin or rivet missing here that holds this to the receiver. Luckily, you can use several different large screws for that, and you can use a pop rivet, or you can actually use the rivet from an M16 AR-15 front sling swivel. So just anything to hold that in. They're, I think, the same parts as on the T91 as well, so that's another option too if you happen to have them. But yeah, fitting the barrel looks good, and it looks like the gas block will go on fine. And this is threaded 1/2 by 28, which is the same as the flash hider here. And here the handguards are, just kind of fitted on to give you an idea how it's all working out. This would be where the screw would go on top to hold it on, and you would take it off to get to your piston for cleaning and maintenance. So that's kind of how that worked. Very much like an AR-18 there. So yeah, this is the kit, and of course this is in the rough, just as you get it. These guns were primarily produced from 1976 through 1979, 1980, and equipped the Taiwanese military. And then they were sold to many other nations, including some in South America, which is actually where these kits came from, if you couldn't tell. And again, they would replace it with the T65 K2. Now the K2 was a 20-inch rifle, still had the pencil barrel, still used an A1 type lower, but it was made for the newer SS-109, the 62 grain type bullets, so it had a 1-in-7 twist. Also, the K2 introduced a new flash hider / compensator instead of just a birdcage flash hider. And whereas the T65 had a safe semi-auto lower, the K2 had a safe semi-burst auto, or some sources say burst and auto were kind of interchanged, but some say they were four-way. either way, we know that by the time of the T91, they did a four-way lower. Also, the K2 had improved handguards, and it had more of a traditional carry handle and a little bit more traditional sights as well. But the K2 really didn't come into service till the late 80s, at least in widespread use. So the T65 here would have been used through the late 70s and the 80s, and would have been kind of Taiwan's first line of defense. But anyway, you see this in the rough form. But now let's see what one of these looks like all cleaned up. So here you go, folks. One all cleaned up and assembled up. This is on a different barrel I'll talk about in a bit. I mean, still on a 20-inch, but a little bit different. And again, the furniture has been cleaned up a wee bit. Not a whole lot of work though, just frankly, a toothbrush and a cloth and some grease and oil to kind of get the gook off and add a little bit of life to it. And yeah, they really do start to kind of pop back in to existence. So I'm actually kind of impressed with that. As far as the metal, well, you know, you can Cerakote, Duracoat, do whatever you want. Replace that, whatever, you know, whatever you feel is appropriate. Stuck a Stanag mag in them. These mostly seem to have 30-round mags in them, because by the time these came into service, into use, the 20s were starting to really get replaced. Pistol grip is very A1 style. Is a little different though, but again, this buttstock is just neat. It's paddle style. Here is that kind of pinhead screw here. That's what we'd remove to disassemble for getting to our gas piston. Hopefully you can see it in there on the handguard. It's pretty exposed, which is kind of interesting. Something they would do away with the T91, giving it a little more protection. Now, one thing to note, this barrel was one of the Brownells, and it had a short base here, so it doesn't quite line up properly, but it works for now at any rate. So if you have one of the Brownells with the short base area, you can make it work, but it might give you a headache or two. Otherwise, you come out here, birdcage. This is a 1 in 12 twist. It's actually MP tested, so not a bad thing at all. And I just actually took the lower off my T91 and donated it to this for right now, because they both use a A1 style lower. And flipping it over so you can see the other side. Notice this rotating sling swivel. I don't know why, but I just I find that kind of neat. And the fact that the front one also rotates to the side. Pretty standard bayonet lug. Yeah, pretty standard in a lot of ways, except for the gas system on this guy. That's the major difference, and that's good, because if you want to put a new buffer and spring in, the standard rifle buffer and spring for the trigger pack, the FCG, you can use a standard AR-15. Nothing special there. Same goes for the catch and everything. And the bolt parts are a little different, but things like firing pins, cam pins are the same. The difference is, of course, in the gas key. And your rear sight is going to be a little different. So, It's different, but the same, and that's good because that means we can get parts for these. So what do you think? I know some thought that the asking price, these were just released from HK PartsNet, and the price was $1,200 or $1,250, and many said the kit was beat up and not worth it. And that's, you're not wrong, because it's an opinion and it's as valid as anyone else's. But I'm curious, seeing one that's had a little bit of energy put into it, do you still feel the same, or does it maybe seem a little better to you now? I'm honestly curious, so let me know in the comments. Let's put the T65 on standard GI bipod, just so I can show you this gas system real quick. This is, like I said, a part you're going to have to replace along with the pin. I've already loosened it. Screw will work just fine. Just a big flat screw to go in that hole. Funnily enough, the part this is on top of, this little bracket, is actually from a G3 A2 buttstock, and HK Parts said that some of these that came in, I guess because the original piece was missing already, they had these on, so that's where they got the idea to use as kind of a replacement. So that's on there. Once you remove that screw, you can just lift your handguard off. And here's our gas piston. Here's our spring. It's a sectional piston, with the front piece here, and then you have the cups and everything. So, pretty neat. Again, very, very AR-18, AR-180. And that's pretty much what it does. Now, like I said, on the T91, this is all protected and everything, but hey, this was their first effort. So, what do you think? That's kind of the main difference, is you have a gas piston and some interesting sights. And it just wouldn't be a complete video without a comparison or two. So again, I have the Colt M16A1 out. Again, this is a late style one with the later buttstock. And yeah, they're very similar in length. The T65 and A1 have a 20-inch barrel. Overall length of right at 39 inches. Of course, the M16 has a carry handle, and the 65 does not. The M16 is about 6.5 pounds here unloaded. The Taiwanese gun is about 7.25 pounds, and most of that extra weight is, of course, because of our gas system. A little more going on, a little more weight in the piston area there. A little larger, thicker front sight with the flip up. Just little extra things. And potentially the buttstock's slightly heavier. And we have the rotatey sling swivel here. So that, adds a little weight, but not a whole lot. And they did this, of course, because they felt it gave them more reliability, and it's just what they wanted to do. Again, Factory 205 was trying to make Taiwan's first domestic 5.56 223 rifle, and while they borrowed very heavily from the Colt, they still did their own thing. By the way, the lower on the military gun, it would just be marked T65. Wasn't terribly ornate, and again, originally it would have a 3-way selector. The 4 ways would come in later with the K2s. And speaking of, Taiwan was not the only one to make the K2, or rather a K2. Of course, there's always the South Korean Daewoo K2, and very similar concept in theory. This too was based on the Colt M16A1, but a more radical departure here. You know, it uses a AK style long stroke gas piston, whereas the T65 uses a short stroke. Of course, the T65 uses a recoil in the buttstock, whereas the Daewoo does not. That's in the receiver up here. Again, very AK style. See the longer gas tube. But still, yeah, a very similar concept all in all. The Daewoo weighs about the same, maybe a hair more than the T65. But the T65 has a 20-inch barrel, and the Daewoo has an 18.25. Yet overall length, the Daewoo is slightly longer. Again, just an interesting parallel that I couldn't pass up the chance to mention. And yeah, they both use the name K2, although of course with the T65 that's a sub-variant name like A1, A2, and this is literally the K2. The K1 was an entirely different critter, which was actually a direct impingement, but that's a story for a whole other video. But since these are both from that part of the world, and since they saw service around the same time, the Taiwanese gun does predate the Korean gun by 7 or 8 years. And actually the T65 K2 came out a few years after the Daewoo K2. And the Daewoo K2 is still very much in service today, whereas the T65 is really only in second line reserve, training, guard, and Air Force use. So it's mostly replaced by the T91. But the K2 here is very much frontline for Korea. Yeah. Both kind of have that 80s retro take on the 60s Colt, in my opinion. And just to close the video out, let's talk about the gun of the Adversary. Well, to be fair, really a Chinese Type 81 would be more correct, but we don't really have those in America. We do have, of course, this 56-2, which at one time was supposed to be kind of the next step in the communist Chinese, the mainland Chinese, the PLA. But because it took so long to apparently make a Bakelite grip in stock, they ended up going with the Type 81, although they did kind of keep on using this style of stock. But yeah, China, of course, when Taiwan was developing this, China was using mostly Kalashnikovs as their standard infantry rifle. Of course, these would be firing 7.62x39. They have the also famous Chinese iron sights, 16.25-inch barrel, versus a 20-inch 223 barrel. Weight-wise, honestly, they're pretty similar. Reliability-wise, I don't think anyone would argue that the AK still kind of has it, but perhaps you could say it's a little less refined, not as nice of a trigger on a military gun versus a military T65. I just thought it was kind of interesting food to think about what the other China was equipping its troops with in the 70s and 80s. And who doesn't like to end on some Bakelite? So there you have it so far. An update to the T65. And of course, in the next part, we will be at the range. But I wanted to have time to get up and really close with this and talk about things. And how many of you ended up buying these kits from HK Parts Net? And if so, how do you like them? How do they come in? How do they look? Are they worth it? Are they beat up? I would say if your furniture looks really dull, don't despair yet. You know, a little bit of time, it might pop back to life. And of course, again, with the metal, you can always anodize or Cerakote or Duracoat, whatever you'd like to do. So sometimes, you know, these things, any parts kit can be a bit of a diamond in the rough, you know. And these are pretty uncommon, pretty rare. I know that for years, T91 Tactical has tried to bring T65 K2 kits into the country. And as far as I know, Sean is still working on that, but it's been a very trying process, COVID notwithstanding. So it is nice to see some T65s, even if they are the original version, not the later K2 version. And speaking of, which do you prefer? Do you like the T65 or do you prefer the later T65 K2? Or do you just really like the modern T91? Or do you not like any of these? I don't know. Let's talk about it in the comments. With that, I will let you go. I hope this time the camera worked out a little bit better. Feel free to comment any questions. Please do post. And as always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, as always, please check out the link to the Patreon page. With that, this is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon. Next time.